Friends, raise your hand if you've taken a personality test before. So a lot of us have taken personality tests. And initially, I had some skepticism about what exactly it is we're doing here. But I found that there is some science to back it up. The subtitle of my talk is This Week on Amateur Hour, because I'm not a psychologist, I'm not a personality scientist. This is just what I gathered from skimming a couple of papers and some Stats 101 knowledge. But I hope that it will be valuable to you to think about what personality is. So here I have a picture of personality. I have a blank slide because two reasons. One is, what does personality look like? And that's a question that we're going to think about a little bit. And the second is, people are kind of blank slates. You can really have a lot of different personalities. And I like to think that maybe each person is a different kind of personality entirely, which is why I love to read stories and watch TVs and movies, because a good character is really compelling if they feel unique. Now, like I mentioned, there's a lot of different ways to think about personality, and that poses a bit of a problem. There's a term called physics envy, which is this idea that a lot of other sciences are trying to be like physics and how rigorous they are. So I have a little spectrum here where we have everyone's favorite theorist on the side, Sigmund Freud. He's got some zany ideas. And on the right, we have Einstein. And the trick that we're going to have to strike here is how to think about this problem so that we're actually doing science. So what does that mean? Well, what would make personality tricky to define? Okay, one thing is stability. We're going to assume that people have some kind of stable personality across their lifetime. So one distinction we want to make is that personality is kind of like an average estimate of your normal behavior compared to something like ability, which would be your best performance on a test. And then is personality just a linguistic concept? Is it just words that we use, or does it point to something real? And the literature in personality is not quite clear on what this would mean. So two admittedly buzzword-laden phrases might be motivational system with affective core. So something like a certain personality trait describes how you go about a task in a certain emotional way. Or it could be stylistic and habitual patterns of cogitation, affect, and behavior. So just your particular way of thinking, feeling, and behaving. Or it might be something else entirely. So let's just assume that there is something called personality. What kind of data might we use to pinpoint it? There's a acronym here, LOTS, L, life outcome data. This is the kind of info that you would find on a school record or tax document. What's your name? What's your age? What were your grades like? Have you been to prison? Things like that. O would be observational data. This would come from someone who knows you well and could speak to the way that you think and behave. T would be objective test data. This would be if we sat you down in the lab and made you do some kinds of tests and made some extrapolations from that. And S is self-reported data. That's just stuff that you would fill out on a questionnaire. So the main idea here is called factor analysis. There are thousands of personality words we could potentially use to describe a person in the English language. But we have the sense that a lot of them are synonyms, or they're variants of each other, or they're clustered. So the question we want to ask is, what's the fewest number of words you need to accurately describe a person? And there's a mathematical way to do that. We can skip the details. But the idea would be to create a personality test. This would be self-reported data. And I have a picture here on the left of different items. So for example, I'm the life of the party. I feel a little concerned for others. I'm always prepared. And then you give this questionnaire to people and they scale themselves 1 to 5 or 1 to 10, something like that. And our goal is to pick the traits that explain the most spread in the data. So on the right, there's a table from a paper, and each of these constructs is basically some combination of these different items that somehow captures the similarities between them. So you can see that extroversion explains 54.1% of the variance in the population. And agreeableness is a different trait, which describes 31.4% of the variance in the population. So the idea is that with all these 5, you might be able to pretty precisely pinpoint where someone is in this really big space of personality. Now, what I just brought up is called the Big 5 personality model, and we'll discuss that in a second. There are some other models. The one on the left is called Hexaco, so it includes a honesty, humility aspect to it. More or less everything else is the same. And on the right is the Myers-Briggs test, which has a extroversion, introversion, sensing, intuition, thinking, feeling, judging, perceiving aspect to it. If you get into psychometrics, you'll find that people complain a lot about Myers-Briggs because it doesn't quite follow the same rigorous analysis as what we just showed. But we're not really using this for anything in particular. So I'm going to say that all models are wrong and some are better than others. I think for our purposes, it doesn't really matter which one we use. They all kind of map more or less to the same thing. So let me quickly overview what this personality model looks like. You can use canoe or ocean to remember it. There's an openness aspect. How much do you like new ideas, thinking about weird concepts, looking at art? Conscientiousness, how productive are you is a good proxy of that. How willing are you to sit down and do your work? Extroversion, do you like to seek people and interactions? Agreeableness, do you get along with people? Do you admit faults when there are ones and try to get along with people? And neuroticism, this is a word that has some negative connotation, but in the psychometric lingo, it just means your tendency to feel high stress or negative emotion. There's one paper that I just wanted to highlight, which just had people rate personality as a function of behavior, thinking, and emotion. So each of these different traits is more or less related to how you either behave or think or feel. So for example, if you're open, that's really related to how you think here. On the other hand, neuroticism is highly dependent on how you feel, your affect, but not so much on behavior and cogitation. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Finally, are some personalities just better than others? So a blog post that I looked at correlates different things like life satisfaction, job satisfaction, income with the different traits. And blue is high correlated. So it seems like if you were picking your personality, you might want to be extroverted, agreeable, conscientious, emotionally stable, so opposite of neurotic, and open. Just something to keep in mind. I wouldn't draw any real conclusions from this. But the takeaways for you are, for each trait, you'll be at a different percentile. Maybe you're 80% agreeable or 20% with an openness. So my advice to you is try to figure out which side you're on. You could take a personality test or just think about it yourself. Think about what benefits this correlates with, what weaknesses it confers, and learn to use either side of the spectrum. Thank you.